Imagine risking a fifth of your entire nation's wealth on a single gamble and watching it die in a jungle. In the summer of 1698, thousands of ordinary Scots poured their life savings into a plan to build a trading empire on a strip of disease-ridden coastline in Panama. Merchants, weavers, lords, servants, everyone bought in, from the highest lord to the humblest servant. Within 2 years, most of the colonists were dead. The money was gone, and Scotland itself teetered on the edge of economic collapse. This is the story of the Darien scheme, the doomed colony that helped end 300 years of Scottish independence. The man behind it all was William Paterson, a Scottish financier who had already helped found the Bank of England. Paterson believed he'd found the key to global trade, a narrow strip of land in Panama called Darien, where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans nearly touched. Control that isthmus, he argued, and you controlled the flow of goods between Europe and Asia without the months-long, storm-battered voyage around Cape Horn. He called his future colony Caledonia and pitched it as Scotland's ticket out of poverty and into the ranks of the great trading powers, alongside England, Spain, and the Dutch. On paper, the logic was seductive. A short overland crossing at Darien could turn Scotland into the middleman of world trade, ships unloading cargo on one coast, goods hauled across the isthmus by land, and reloaded onto waiting ships on the other side, avoiding the long voyage around Cape Horn entirely. But the reality on the ground told a different story. The site Paterson had chosen was, in truth, a malarial swamp already claimed by Spain, with no viable local trading partners, and the cargo the company shipped, combs, mirrors, and heavy wool goods, was poorly suited to the region's needs and climate. None of that stopped the money from pouring in. The Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies was chartered to fund the venture, and investment poured in from every level of Scottish society, nobles, merchants, tradesmen, and ordinary citizens alike. In just a few weeks, subscribers pledged roughly £400,000 sterling, close to a fifth of all the liquid capital in Scotland at the time. It was an extraordinary act of national faith. An entire country, hungry for a stake in the age of empire, had just bet its savings on a strip of foreign jungle it had never seen. In July 1698, 5 ships, the St. Andrew, Caledonia, Unicorn, Dolphin, and Endeavour, slipped out of the port of Leith, timed deliberately to avoid the prying eyes of the Royal Navy. On board were roughly 1,200 colonists, sailing toward a coastline none of them had ever seen. After months at sea, the fleet reached the coast of Darien on the 2nd of November, 1698. The settlers waded ashore, raised the Scottish flag, and named their new home Caledonia. For a brief moment, the dream felt real. The moment didn't last. The site was a malarial swamp, hemmed in by dense jungle, crushing heat, and torrential rain. Fevers spread fast through the crowded, poorly built settlement, and food supplies dwindled by the week. Within 7 months, around 400 of the original settlers were dead, and survivors were described as emaciated, yellow with fever, barely able to stand upright. Of the roughly 1,200 who first landed at Caledonia, historians estimate only around 300 would ultimately survive the ordeal. Isolation made everything worse, because Scotland's colonists weren't just fighting nature. King William III, who ruled both Scotland and England, actively worked against them, issuing a proclamation forbidding English colonies across the Americas and the Caribbean from supplying the Scots with food or aid of any kind. Meanwhile, in London, the powerful English East India Company, determined to protect its own trade monopoly, pressured English and Dutch investors to pull their backing from the Scottish company. Caledonia had been left to die, cut off from help by the very neighbors who might have saved it. Before the year was out, the survivors could no longer hold on. Starving, sick, and without reinforcement, the remaining colonists abandoned Caledonia and scattered aboard whatever ships could carry them home or onward. Word of the disaster took months to cross the Atlantic, which meant that even as the first colony was collapsing, a second wave of hopeful Scots was already crossing the ocean, sailing straight toward a settlement that no longer existed. That second expedition, roughly 1,300 colonists strong, landed at the end of November 1699, completely unaware their predecessors were gone. Instead of the thriving colony they had been promised, they found an empty, overgrown settlement swallowed back by jungle. Disaster followed almost immediately. The ship carrying their food supplies caught fire and burned. Then a Spanish fleet arrived and blockaded the harbor, cutting off any hope of resupply or escape by sea. The second wave of Scotland's dream had arrived just in time to inherit the first wave's nightmare. Amid the collapse came one brief moment of Scottish success. In January 1700, a soldier named Alexander Campbell of Fanab led a frontal assault that drove Spanish forces from a stockade at Talbotcanty, a real tactical victory, though Campbell himself was wounded in the fighting and later incapacitated by fever. It wasn't enough to save the colony. Spanish commander Juan Pimienta laid siege to Fort St. Andrew for roughly a month, threatening no quarter if the Scots refused to surrender. On the 31st of March, 1700, the fort finally capitulated. Under the negotiated terms, the surviving colonists were allowed to leave with their weapons defeated, decimated, but alive. The human and financial toll was staggering. Across both expeditions, an estimated 2,000 people died from fever, starvation, and battle. William Paterson himself had sailed with the first expedition. His wife Hannah and their child both died of fever in the failed colony. He returned home having lost his family and watched his life's ambition collapse. In total, the Darien scheme consumed roughly a quarter of Scotland's entire liquid wealth. The nation that had bet so much on a Panamanian swamp now faced genuine economic ruin. That financial catastrophe didn't just wound Scotland. Many historians argue it helped push the country into England's arms. In 1707, the Scottish Parliament agreed to the Acts of Union, merging Scotland and England into a single kingdom. Built into the deal was a cash payment known as the equivalent, nearly £400,000 sterling, and the majority of it went straight to compensating the ruined shareholders of the Darien scheme, Paterson included, though his own payout wasn't settled until 1715. A doomed colony in a Panamanian jungle had, in the end, helped dissolve Scotland's independence and reshape the map of Britain for the next 3 centuries.